Yeah, good morning, everyone. It's great to see so many of you here. So today we're going to discuss the update to our living wage policy suite. And first, we're going to take a step back to look at our blueprint and the pioneering work that we've been doing on living wage during the past 2 decades and where that brought us today. Then we will discuss the update to our living wage policy suite, which serves not only as a set of requirements for Fairware members, but also really as a practical framework for any garment company looking to advance living wages in their supply chains. Then we will look at how the policy translates into the way we keep Fairware member brands accountable through the yearly assessment of their due diligence, including their due diligence on living wage. And finally, we will provide an overview of practical tools and guidance we have developed to guide any garment company towards increasing wages in their supply chains, as well as the industry alignment work that we do. And finally, we will have some time for a Q&A. So let me now briefly explain 3 key wage concepts based on ILO definitions. First, we have the legal minimum wage. That is the lowest wage employers are legally required to pay. It is set by law, it cannot be reduced, and its main purpose is to protect workers from very low pay. Second, the living wage is what workers need to earn to afford a decent standard of living for themselves and for their families. These include basic needs like food, housing, healthcare, education, and other essential costs. And unlike the minimum wage, it is based on actual living cost. Then we have the target wage that can be considered as an interim step. It is a wage level that is agreed between a brand, a supplier, and ideally worker representatives as a progress towards a living wage. And it recognizes that reaching a living wage often takes a lot of time and requires gradual step-by-step improvements. Let's now briefly look at the context we are working in that makes wage increase more challenging. So first, there is a lack of binding global human rights protections. Garment supply chains are global, but laws are not. And brand suppliers and workers operate in different legal systems, and there is no single framework that holds everyone accountable. And this is why initiatives like Fairware exist. Second, the social dialogue is often weak. In many production countries, workers cannot easily organize or negotiate wages. And as a result, wages are rarely set through real negotiation and often do not meet basic needs. Then we have a very competitive industry, very highly fragmented as well. Brands compete on low prices and fast delivery, and that puts pressure on suppliers. Production is spread across many factories with short-term, volatile relationships, and that make it difficult to ensure accountability. At the same time, brands, of course, do not employ workers most of the times. Factories are legally responsible for wages, but brands hold most of the financial power and influence, especially through their pricing decisions. And finally, we see prices often set top-down. Brands start from the retail price and the target margins rather than the actual production cost. And this means that labor costs and whether wages cover a living wage are often not properly considered in pricing decisions. And so together, all these factors explain why achieving living wages require deliberate strategic action, especially from brands, but most importantly, in collaboration with suppliers and worker representatives. So in our 27 years of experience as Fairware, we have worked towards addressing all these challenges in different ways. Here are some of the things we have done related to living wages in our history. So from the beginning, we recognized that paying a living wage requires more than compliance with minimum wage laws, of course. So we started by researching wage gaps and developing tools to make these gaps visible, such as the wage ladder, which is still publicly available on our website with up-to-date legal minimum wages and living wage estimates. Over time, we have moved from awareness raising to practical solutions. So we have developed methodologies like the labor minute costing to help brands understand their share of responsibility in closing the living wage gap and to translate wage gap into fair pricing. At the same time, we have also provided guidance to brands on responsible purchasing and what that looks like, also entering and developing initiatives like the Common Framework for Responsible Purchasing Practices together with the MSI Working Group, because of course, pricing, planning, and long-term stable relationships are key to enabling higher wages. We have also played a role in keeping brands accountable through our brand performance check, where we assess if brands are taking real steps towards living wages. And we have been engaging as well with suppliers, with business associations to raise awareness on what fact-based costing is and how it can be used to negotiate fairer prices. We have also supported brands working groups on their living wage projects, pilots, and on their journey towards increasing wages in their supply chains. And more recently, we have developed a modular assessment on wages and overtime, which gives in-depth insights to brands into wages below living wage, excessive working hours, and my colleague Victoria is going to talk a little bit more about that and our other tools. So we can say really our approach as Fairware combines research, practical tools, guidance, and accountability to support steady increase of wages in supply chains. And so coming to the current days from this history, we now focus really on advancing living wages through systemic changes in sourcing and purchasing practices rather than individual smaller level change, which is of course also important, but we look at what is the system we operate with. At Fairware, we see living wages not as a standalone objective, but really as an outcome of responsible purchasing, which is enabled by an equitable sourcing relation between brands and suppliers. And through our supplier engagement work, we work with suppliers and business associations to strengthen their position in sourcing dialogue and in their negotiations with brands. And we believe that by amplifying supplier voices individually and collectively, we can influence sourcing and purchasing practices that then, of course, affect labor conditions, including increased wages. And at the global industry level, we engage and we develop partnerships with other organizations to create systemic change and to shape the level playing field for improved working conditions and improved wages. So we have shifted from individual isolated living wage implementation projects, although we keep on guiding our member brands and any other brands interested in working on living wages. But especially now we support brands and suppliers in engaging in fair price negotiations grounded in fact-based costing. And so fair pricing, of course, starts with fact-based costing, which Victoria is going to discuss more in detail later. And we guide brands and suppliers to cost and negotiate prices that cover all production costs, direct and indirect labor costs included, of course, contribute to the payment of a living wage, account for the cost of any other human rights due diligence activities, and cover a reasonable supplier margin and investment in sustainable operations. Let's now look at the living wage policy suite and what this update that we made look like. So we had a public consultation process for the policy and the approach where we collected feedback from other organizations. And we have then aligned the policy to the 2024 ILO agreement on living wage and to the 2024 OECD handbook on living wage and living income. This update also aligns the suite with the new structure that we follow for our policy and guidances, where we divide our documents between policy, approach, and guidance so that we can offer a theoretical framework, a requirements framework, and practical guidance and tools for brands. The policy also reflects recent industry developments since we have now updated the living wage standard to make sure that we integrate the outcomes of the ILO agreement. And at the same time, this guidance really clarify Fairware's recommended living wage estimates and how brands can select estimates and how those should be used in the factories that they work in. And finally, this policy also makes it clear how different key focus areas that we work on link to each other. So responsible purchasing, freedom of association, gender responsiveness, and access to remedy. and how all of these are very much interlinked into supporting sustainable wage increase over time. And so they are now into one coherent approach. So going into what is central to the new policy is the fact that we take a dual approach to living wages. So first, we want to see brands ensuring their purchasing practices support living wages. This means focusing on fair pricing, fact-based costing, long-term, high quality and stable relations, so that suppliers really have the financial stability to work on wage increase and that they are supported financially by brands as well. We refer brands to the common framework for responsible purchasing practices, which we have developed with other MSIs. And then we also want to see brands supporting an enabling environment for freedom of association, collective bargaining, and social dialogue, because we, of course, want to see in the end workers being the ones actively negotiating their working conditions, including their wages. So we also have detailed guidance for brands on the steps to take to enable freedom of association in their supply chain, which we will share in the chat. We have step-by-step approaches and tools for that. And so it's also important to recognize that wage issues are gendered, and we also have guidance on gender-responsive HRDD. And yeah, some more highlights. So the starting point of the policy is that our standard is that workers in members' supply chains receive a living wage, and anything less than that is a violation of the standard. So as brands generally don't employ workers in their supply chains, this means that they must ensure that a living wage is paid across all of their production locations. If a brand sources from many production locations, each location should fulfill these requirements, regardless of whether it's a shared facility or wholly owned facility. But at the same time, we of course recognize that full compliance takes time. So the focus for us is to demonstrate real progress over time. And we assess this progress to the brand performance check, where brands are credited for concrete steps like costing labor based on living wage estimates, identifying where the funding can come from, and verifying that workers actually receive higher wages. And we really want to call out the fact that this policy gives a framework on what to look out for when increasing wages, but really any steps taken in price and wage increase, even the smallest ones, even starting without having all the exact figures, is a very meaningful improvement in the life of a garment worker. So it's important for any company to look at this policy as a set of recommendations to ensure effective impact rather than a strict protocol, because we don't want, of course, this to slow down action. So this framework also comes from the decades of experience that we have and all the brands we have supported with their living wage journeys. And that's why it stays very practical and grounded in this experience and observations. Then another key update is related to the human rights due diligence cycle. So now we have integrated that into our policy to make sure that due diligence on living wage can be followed for each of the OECD steps. So first, we want to see brands embedding their commitments by integrating living wage into policies, pricing, costing, and sourcing practices. Then brands assess risk and gaps. So they collect wage data, they identify living wage gaps, and they understand how pricing and purchasing practices impact wages. And then brands take action in step 3 by setting a target wage, closing the gap, improving the enabling environment, and working with suppliers and other brands. And finally, brands also track and communicate the progress that they do on living wage implementation, and they ensure that higher prices actually lead to higher wages through also verification of wages in their suppliers. Then we can go to the next. Yes, the wage increase cycle is really part of the foundational approach of Fairware to living wage, and that helps brands moving step by step towards higher wages in a sustainable way. He recognizes that wages are not static and progress require continuous action and review. So that's why all the arrows link to each other, because we see it as a continuous improvement process. The cycle starts by understanding the link between buying prices and wages. So you see that in the red section, how much, using labor minute costing, the methodology we have developed, translated into the Fair Price app. Brands assess how much the price they actually pay goes to labor and how much prices would need to increase to support higher wages. Then you see it in the yellow section, brands need to determine how much budget is needed and where that money can come from. This can include sharing responsibility with other buyers in the same factory, but also adjusting margins, improving efficiencies in production, or by increasing consumer prices. And once prices are adjusted, brands need to ensure that the money reaches workers. And you see that in the blue section. So we want to see wage increases to be traceable, verifiable, and structural. So not one-off bonuses, but sustainable increases. And throughout the cycle, brands should then engage workers, of course, their representatives, and involve them to set living wage targets, verifying wages, and throughout the whole process. So in the picture, you can see in the black section the tools and guidance that we offer, which will be discussed in more detail in a little bit. Then the fair approach is built around three key elements, which are important to mention. Money, of course, because wage increase require real funding. Then social dialogue, because wage increase depends on workers being able to negotiate their wages through collective bargaining and strong social dialogue. And then accountability, because there should be transparent systems that ensure that the money that is paid to by brands to the factories actually reaches workers. And let's now look at living wage estimates. So we provide clear recommendations for that in our living wage approach, which you can find on our website together with our living wage policy. And so if wages are set through laws and collective bargaining, living wage estimates actually serve rather as a clear reference point for negotiations. They show what it actually costs for workers and their families to live decently and how much a salary should be to cover for this cost. They're based on real life data, a basket of goods, a defined family size that can vary per country, local conditions in a specific place and time. And for brands, living wage estimates are a practical tool that can help determine how much labor should cost and how prices need to be adjusted to support living wages. And importantly, brands don't need a perfect estimate to start, because what matters is setting a credible target, paying higher wages, and taking all those small steps to close the wage gap. And so as Fairware, we do not provide or produce our own living wage estimates, but we recognize a set of credible methodologies. And these are the Asia Floor Wage, the Anchor or Global Living Wage Coalition, the wage indicator estimates, and most importantly, the trade union estimates, which we prioritize wherever available. Because, of course, the very purpose of brands calculating their share of living wage increase is eventually to create that financial space in which workers and management can negotiate sustainable wage increase. So that's why, since functional industrial relations are our end goal, it's critical that we support trade unions. And in many countries, trade unions contribute to developing cost of living studies. And they do that to support their own wage negotiations and to ensure that adjustments to workers' wages allow for a decent standard of living in the country. So for a country where this estimate exists, trade unions, cost of living studies are to be taken into account as living wage estimates. Brands also receive country-specific guidance through the Fairware system to support a consistent application of these estimates. And we're now looking at the overview. This is the overview that brands have in the platform that our member brands have access to, where they can really track their due diligence work and progress, their factories, all the actions that they are putting in place to prevent or remediate violations. And so in the overview, they can see the indication of the methodology for selecting living wage estimates, background information per country, also looking at the garment sector per country, the rule of law per country, and then information on the estimates themselves. And these country profiles are validated by local stakeholders, most importantly. Then next, just a quick example of what it looks like in our system. So this is an example from Bangladesh. Our members are able to see the estimates that we recommend, the Asia Floor Wage, Global Living Wage Coalition, the legal minimum wages, and the trade union estimates with also details when they're valid from, and of course the figures. And then in the next slide, we're going to see how these estimates can be compared to each other in a chart, and that can be seen by using the wage ladder, which is a tool that is publicly available on our website. We're going to add a link in the chat if you would like to have a look and try it out. So here you can find a visual comparison of wages paid at any factory. So you can enter the data of the factory that is relevant for you. You select the country, select the region that you're focusing on, and then you can select the different estimates. And so you can then see how each of the estimates compare to each other. And that's a very visual and easy tool to access. Okay, then now I'm giving the floor to my colleague Victoria, who is going to discuss fact-based costing and brand accountability.
Thanks a lot, Sophia, and also hello to everyone from my side. Yeah, indeed, as also Sophia already explained, I will go a little bit more into detail now on how brands can actually support the payment of a living wage. As Sophia also mentioned, brands are not paying wages, brands are paying prices. So that is also a very important part of our guidance for brands towards a living wage. And yeah, in my presentation, I'm also going to share a little bit more on examples that we have, because in our work with a lot of brands, we collected already a lot of experiences, and I would also like to share that with you today. So first, on the fact-based costing methodology, this is a very important methodology for Fairware and also the main methodology that we use in guiding brands. And with the fact-based costing, we really want brands to better understand how their buying prices link to the wage levels in factories, so that they can link their buying prices to wages in the garment factories. And of course, that's very important. That includes especially the buying department, so that the buying department is also able to quantify the required increase for wages in their prices or implemented in their prices. So for that, of course, it's very important to understand how big the labor cost component of your product price is. And for that, we already many years ago, we have developed the so-called labor costing methodology, which is, I try to put that here already in an overview. It's, brands calculate a labor minute cost by putting or dividing the annual labor cost with the total production time per year. Of course, that whole methodology is quite extensive and complex. And I will also explain a little bit more in a bit, but we have quite extensive guidance also on that. But this is very, very crucial to better understand the buying prices of your products and styles. I also quickly want to address the costing for human rights strategy that we are developing. And this also goes, of course, a bit beyond only looking at the labor cost component in your product price. But as we have many other series coming up for the living wage webinar series, we will address that, of course, in the future in more detail. But of course, the labor cost component is one part of looking at the whole costing for human rights methodology. Yeah, when we talk about fact-based costing, it is very important to also highlight that our approach is always to look from the bottom up, so to create prices as from the bottom up methodology, as we know. And Sophia also mentioned that, of course, the reality in the industry is, of course, still that usually brands do a top-down pricing. So they first look based on market research, what is the selling price that I want to have, and then they calculate that down, and in the end there's a certain component that is left for the actual labor costs. And with the fact-based costing, actually, we would turn it around and look really from bottom up. What are the labor costs included for producing that specific product, and then adding on that to the buying price, so you come up with the selling price in the end. So this is really something that we encourage brands to look at. As I know that, of course, the fact-based costing is quite complex for brands, and we also receive quite some questions. And of course, also in the past, we have quite a lot of experience with working together with brands and implementing the fact-based costing methodology. So I also wanted to go a bit more deeper into showing you some examples of how brands actually do that and implement that. So first of all, what we see a lot is that fairer member brands, of course, start with collecting wage data. So before you start with the actual fact-based costing, that is really something very important to have an overview of. And most of our member brands do that through on-site assessments, surveys, or also asking for wage slips, and then also verifying that data, of course. We do have then actually several brands working already with their suppliers on using FairPrice app. I will come to that tool as well in a bit. So this tool is a very important tool for our labor costing methodology. So by using the tool, brands can actually figure out together with the supplier, because it is needed that the supplier puts in the data, to actually figure out on how the actual number of sewing minutes that is needed for a specific product or a style, to actually understand better the labor cost of a product. We also had it already many times, and I think that's also quite a challenge that a lot of brands face, is of course that some suppliers are quite reluctant in using fact-based costing, or even using also FairPrice app as a tool, which is also somehow understandable, because of course that is a lot of data that will be shared with the brand. So in that sense, of course, we also guide brands to make sure that there are certain agreements in place between the buyer and the supplier. So what we also had, for example, what I also wanted to show you here in one example, that a brand, for example, also figured out after the supplier was quite reluctant on using the methodology, that they came up with buyer-supplier agreement ensuring continuous orders and specific order volumes to make sure they have a long-term contract with the supplier where also certain terms are regulated. So the supplier also felt more safe to share also the data and to continue with the fact-based or to share the fact-based costing data. Also for another brand that we worked with, another example that I found really interesting is also that because of course the buying department plays a very important role in all of this, is that, for example, the buying prices is not a performance indicator for the purchasing staff. So also then in that sense, the brand had, or especially the buying department had more flexibility in negotiating and increasing prices based on the fact-based costing. What we also see, of course, are some other challenges, and I listed two of the main challenges that always come back to us is incomplete or unverified data. when it comes to fact-based costing, or also, of course, missing agreements with intermediaries. So having intermediaries in between is always, of course, a bigger challenge. But also here, Fairer offers quite some guidance, and we help out brands to face those challenges. I added a very concrete example from our brand performance check analysis, actually, that I wanted to share with you because I think that was really interesting, from one of our member brands that actually does fact-based costing, specifically the labor minute method, or uses the labor minute methodology. So here, for example, the member brands, especially with their cut, make, trim suppliers, they do know the actual sewing minutes of every single style. And the positive thing is that they actually do have a sample production unit in-house. So whenever the brand develops a new style, they can actually exactly track how many minutes are needed for that specific style. And then with that information, they can go into a dialogue with the supplier to identify the actual minutes needed in production. So they come up with an agreement for the production minutes together with the supplier. And then based on that, of course, they can calculate the labor minutes value for each and every style. And even for calculating FOB prices, so with suppliers that also, for example, pre-finance the materials, they also do a very similar approach, so that they also know here the exact workmanship that's needed for each product, so they can also calculate the labor costs. And then by making sure that they also include wage increases in their labor costs, they also do verify wages on a very regular basis to make sure that the extra money that's paid within the prices also ends up with the workers in the end. And they do that on a very frequent basis. Yeah, what also Sophia mentioned already, so always when we talk about wage increases and having a better overview of wage levels in your factories, of course, we also need to consider the gender pay gap. So I also really wanted to address that today. What is the gender pay gap? So how the gender pay gap is calculated, it's always measuring the percentage, so the difference between the average hourly wage of a woman and a man. And in that moment when women earn less than men for doing the same job, we talk about wage discrimination. And wage discrimination is actually illegal in a lot of countries. But of course, the gender pay gap can also come from not only wage discrimination, but also a lot of other reasons. Like, for example, women usually work less hours because they are responsible for the care work as well, or also women's education or skills are undervalued. So sometimes they also are put in lower grades, so they earn less for actually a job where they should earn more for. So these are all facts that we also identify in factories. So now the big question, what can we do? And I always also tell brands the most important thing is data collection when it comes to the gender pay gap, because I think, and that is already quite a complex issue. So yeah, it's collect data to get a better understanding of the situation in your factory. Yeah, I would like to go a bit more into the brand accountability part. And Sophia also addressed it already. We do have, of course, our brand performance check as an accountability tool within Fairer. So every Fairer member brand will be assessed on a yearly basis. And then we do have separate indicators that are addressing a support for a living wage payment. And I listed also, based on the wage increase cycle that Sophia also already presented, I listed also some indicators that are really relevant in the brand performance check that actually addresses those specific pillars in our wage increase cycle. For example, we have our indicator 2.16 in our brand performance check, which is to better understand how buying prices relate to wages, so the how much. Then we have indicator 3.12, which is checking brands on if they have a strategy on how to finance wage increases, the who pays pillar. And then we have indicator 3.13. So this is more about the verification if workers actually received a higher wage. And all of these indicators always include the worker involvement, of course, as well, as you can see that in the middle. I have also listed those indicators again, so you have an overview of that as well. And I also tried to group those wage indicators that we have in our accountability tool to also show you a little bit that it also reflects our approach of our policy that also Sophia mentioned today. So especially what she also mentioned is the step-by-step approach. So we, of course, also acknowledge brands that are on their way to support a payment of a living wage, a certain living wage estimate. So we do have 2 indicators that look very deep into the brand's internal approach. So looking more about what processes are in place, policies, but also certain strategies. Then we do have 2 indicators, 3.10 and 3.11, that capture more the response of a brand based on the identified risks in their supply chain, but also, of course, the response and remediation based on certain monitoring results. And then we have indicator 3.13, which looks a bit more deeper on how brands actually verify and validate that there are a certain standard of wages are paid, or a certain living wage estimate is paid, or a certain target wage is paid. Yeah, now I will go a bit more into the specific indicators, and I thought I don't need to explain in detail again what the exact requirements are that we have for the specific indicators. I rather really wanted to share more practical insights and also examples from our member brands, because I also heard with working with brands that sometimes also, of course, there is a bit of a lack of maybe also hearing from other brands how they can move forward to that, because of course the topic is quite complex. So I really wanted to share some nice examples with you. Before you look a bit more deeper into the actual examples, we look into the indicator 3.11, which is more on understanding the actual root causes of why wages are lower than living wages in the certain or in a brand supply chain and factories. So I listed some of the most common root causes that are actually identified from brands why wages are lower than living wages. So usually what brands identify, and what we always hear back in the brand performance check, is of course one of the most common points is limited data availability. So especially the lack of transparency or a lack of a certain data management system or hour and wage recording system is one of the biggest reasons why it is quite hard for brands to get a better picture of wage payments in their factories. Then another big reason, of course, is the brand's pricing policies, and of course, also their business model that increases the risk of lower wage payments. And with that also, we often see, of course, limited knowledge or lack of knowledge of the labor cost components in their buying prices, which is also a very big root cause, of course. But what we also very often hear from brands is also inefficiencies or a low efficiency rate in the factories. So that's also, of course, interesting, where brands also look a bit more deeper into the productivity and efficiency status of a factory. Then also for certain countries, of course, or certain regions, we also see that hyperinflation or inflation can, of course, also lead to the fact of lower wages. And then also Sophia addressed it already in the industry realities, and it is, of course, a very big reality that we are in is, of course, the competitiveness of prices. for both like the buyer, seller, but also of course the supplier side, where we hear the same feedback. Also linking that to purchasing practices of brands. We also see that brands sometimes identify inconsistent order volumes, or even lower order volumes, or also now challenging economical times as one of the root causes why wage payments are lower than a certain living wage estimate. And then, of course, a very important point is lack of social dialogue, lack of freedom of association, and CBA structures in many countries, of course, where textile production is happening. Now I wanted to share a bit more about some examples that I took out of our brand performance check evaluation. For indicator 3.11, what I can see mostly with brands is, first of all, that they, of course, start creating an overview of wages in their factories. And with that, it is very important that they do that throughout their whole supply chain, and then looking at specifically, of course, the basic wage, but then also the basic wage plus certain benefits for the lowest paid wage and the mode wage. So this is what we of course also guide brands towards too, but we can also see already quite a lot of brands doing that already. And then, of course, comparing that analysis to certain living wage estimates that are there and available. Then, of course, very important is to involve suppliers in the root cause analysis of wages that below the living wage estimates. And that's also, what we can see a lot of brands doing. I have one example of a brand that I found very interesting, is that one member brand we were assessing actually focuses its production on factories with collective bargaining agreements and only focuses on countries or regions where that is possible or already in place. And for other remaining factories, the brand has a really strong living wage approach based on where they identify the highest risks. Also, of course, what we see more and more happening is that several member brands also organize internal trainings on pricing and living wages, especially for their sourcing and buying departments. So that's also very positive, of course, to see that. Then for indicator 3.12, we always look more deeper into strategies that brands have in place to actually finance wage increases. So here what we can see is that brands that have a strategy in place, and most of the times or most of the cases actually, they want to finance wage increases by a reduced brand margin, higher buying prices, or even then higher selling prices, or by simplifying products, or even improving the factory efficiency. What also is very important, and we hear that also more and more back, is that brands need to involve top management in their approach. Because otherwise, if you start creating a strategy and top management is not involved in that, we had it in many cases that didn't work out, of course. One example also from one of our brands that I found very interesting was that one Faro brand actually incorporated wage increases into their prices to their customers. I have to say it is a B2B business. However, where the specific customer refused to pay a higher price to enable a living wage, the member brand covers the higher price themselves, taking that from their margin. Also here, of course, training for sourcing departments should also be part of your strategy, because if that is not happening and these departments plus top management is not involved in the strategy, it is very hard to bring that through. And then also very important, of course, by creating a strategy and also identifying how much you want to pay, it is also very important to include worker representatives in the wage gap discussion. And that is also something that we see is happening, luckily, more and more. For indicator 3.13, so this indicator is about paying the share of a living wage estimate. So here it is actually about how brands can verify that wages are increased. Is either through, of course, they can do that through certain assessments, but also, of course, CBA. So if there is a CBA in place, that will also count, of course, for this indicator. However, it is very important to mention that brands should evaluate the terms and conditions of a CBA, because there are good CBAs out there, but there are also actually bad CBAs out there. We have also more guidance about that, but this is also something that we will assess in the brand performance check. So this is, also, of course, very important. Yeah, coming from the brand accountability and showing some examples, I also want to show you now and go a little bit more deeper into what kind of tools do we offer to then guide brands towards these indicators and make sure that you can actually implement these requirements and standards. It's quite a list of tools that we have worked on, and Sophia already mentioned that already in the past years, but also some of the tools that we are currently developing. So, of course, we have mentioned we have several on-site assessments that brands can request to actually assess wage levels in factories. We have the wage letter that Sophia already showed, which is publicly available on our website. Same also with our new living wage policy and the approach. We are also currently working on the living wage guidance, which will go a bit more deeper also in how wages should be assessed. And that's something that will also follow in the next part of our living wage series. Then, of course, we have our labor minutes costing methodology and quite some guidance out there for that, which is also linked, of course, to the Fair Price App tool. So Fair Price App tool is an application for the labor costing methodology and can also be, you can go to the Fair Price App website and test out the tool. Then, of course, we have our country risks that Sophia already presented, same also with the living wage estimates that are available, which is for now, of course, mainly for Fairer member brands, but also available on certain terms for non-member brands. Then we have the risk scoping tool and the risk assessment tool, which also includes suggested actions. I will go to that in a little bit. And certain learning modules in place for living wages as well. And we are currently also developing a learning module on labor minutes costing and a demo presentation and more detailed information about Fair Price Apps. So that will be published soon as well. We are currently working, and that is also coming soon, on a template agreement for living wage payments between brands and suppliers, to also share a template with you that you can use for your negotiations with your supplier. And we just currently published a living wage ecosystem in the apparel and footwear sector in collaboration with IDH. I know that there is a little glitch of downloading the document. We are happy to share the link. So if you're interested in the document, maybe please just send us an email and we will forward that to you. I quickly wanted to go into our system. So what Sophia already mentioned, of course, is that we do have extensive information on country risks. And that also includes, of course, the labor standard of living wage payment. So brands in the system can use that information and also scope their risks on living wages. And then based on the risks identified, we already suggest certain actions. So brands can choose those actions to create their own action plan. And all these actions are coming, of course, from all the expertise that we have with working for several years together with member brands and also other stakeholders. So this is how it looks like. So brands can actually use this action plan to further, to further work on implementing their strategies on living wage payments. Yeah, what I also mentioned is the Fair Price app as a tool for the labor minute costing methodology. As I mentioned, you can go to the website, create a test account, and also try it out. It's a really nice tool. I think it's great in order to identify if your FOB price actually supports a payment of a certain target wage, for example. But yeah, we will also offer more guidances and learning related to that very soon. I quickly wanted to mention as a last point before I hand over to Sophia that we actually had a very nice project, our RVO project in the previous 5 years, together with 3 member brands in Turkey, where we also got a lot of learnings out of supporting a payment of a living wage, also in times of crisis, especially in terms of inflation and hyperinflation. And it was very interesting learning from brands on how to support a payment of a living wage. And there has been already a webinar specifically on that topic. It happened in February already. So if you're interested in the recording, that is available on the Member Hub, of course, for FAIRWAY members. But also, if you're not a FAIRWAY member, please let us know. We are very happy to share the recording. So I can really recommend to watch that. And then I would hand over again to Sophia. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you, Vicky. So to wrap up this webinar, we wanted to focus a bit also on the work we do on industry alignment. And these are some of the key ways we work with others to advance living wages. So we collaborate at the industry level, for example, through initiatives like the Common Framework for Responsible Purchasing Practices that we mentioned before, which was then translated into the Purchasing Practices Due Diligence Framework, which is a framework to be used by regulators to assess companies based on due diligence principles. And in both of these frameworks, fair pricing through fact-based costing is included as one of the main principles to look at, with also criteria for regulators to check whether brands have conducted their due diligence on living wages. We also contribute to joint tools and thinking, like the collaboration we had with IDH since last year on mapping approaches to living wage implementation, where we came together with a group of brands to also hear what are the needs of companies when it comes to working towards living wage, and when it comes to also coming together with other organizations to provide brands with the right solutions. We also engage with stakeholders in production countries. We really see that as a key part of this approach. And that includes, of course, business associations. So an example was the supplier seminars that we have organized during these past years. A few years ago, we were focusing on fact-based costing and the labor minute costing methodology and how to use the Fair Price app. So we have delivered several seminars in several FAIRWAY countries. More recently, we have delivered seminars on responsible contracting. When it comes to contracting, of course, a key part is also how to make sure that fair pricing and commitments to living wages are embedded into written agreements between brands and suppliers. And another example is the RVO conference we have organized after the project that Vicky was mentioning, where we have brought together the ministry, local trade unions, international trade unions, business associations, and companies sourcing from Turkey. And we have shared the results of our research, the best practices we have encountered, and the main outcomes of the projects with the a broader public that was Turkish, but also international. And we also work closely with trade unions and organizations like Wage Indicators when it comes to strengthening the data and the approaches that we have. And our member brands can have access to a Wage Indicator database, of course. And finally, we also actively participate in global platforms. And one important one coming up is the IDH and UN Global Compact Living Wage Summit on the 30th of June and 1st of July. We're going to be participating as speakers and knowledge holders on living wages and responsible purchasing practices. And so together, these collaborations really help us scale impact and align approaches across the industry. Finally, we are going to just mention a bit about our research and innovation work. So we have a rich database of data about our brands' practices, the factories they source from, information on the progress that is made in preventing and remediating human rights risk and violations. And that also includes remediating violations of wages below legal minimum wage or below living wage estimates. And by using this data, we have conducted research on what impactful HRDD looks like and on what extent brands can influence wages at factories through their prices. And here are some of the findings. So we saw that brands that work closely with suppliers through shared planning and monitoring have fewer issues. For example, excessive overtime is less recurrent in these factories. We also see that when brands identify a risk early and they take preventive action, many problems don't occur. And in contrast, issues are more widespread where risks are not prioritized. And very importantly, brands can influence wages when they link prices to wage levels at the factory floor, especially when they have strong long-term relationships of more than 5 years and sufficient leverage. So at least 10% of more is what was found in our research. And for example, some payroll members have committed to long-term sourcing partnerships and they have adjusted their costing to reflect higher wages in suppliers that were more than 5 years and 10% leverage. So the key takeaway here is that a risk-based approach and responsible purchasing are effective tools to prevent human rights issues and support better wages. And this research is based on real-life brand and supplier data, and that confirms everything we have discussed today. So we will also plan a series of short webinars later this year to go into more detail into the research and discuss the results with our member brands. And also the research I mentioned connects to the UNDP study from 2025, Human Rights versus Competitiveness. And we also have an ongoing collaboration with UNDP on that, and we will communicate more about it later. And finally, let's have a look at the webinars for the remaining of the year. Today was the first part of this webinar series. We will have a members only session next week, the 13th of May in the morning, where we can go through everything we have discussed and more of our tools more in detail. Only for our members. Then the second session will be on our living wage guidance that we are in the process of finalizing, and also looking at the result of research we have conducted on the living wage indicators and the progress of our members in the past 3 years. So we're going to be sharing concrete best practices and examples with all of you and looking at what has been the progress in the past years overall. And that is also followed by a members only session. That's going to be after the summer in Q3. You will receive, of course, information about the link and the timing. And then finally, the third session is going to be about labor minute costing and the fair price up. And it's also going to be followed by a members only session, and that is planned for Q4. And thank you for being here with us for now. I will give the floor to Razan for the last slide, and then we go into the Q&A.
Yeah, so for the brands that are not a FARA member yet, so after hearing all this and you want to improve the human rights situations in your supply chains, then of course there are several ways to do that, so how we can help you is you can start with doing the HRDD Academy. It's self-paced learning via an online platform where you have access to learning modules and also our resources. So we can discuss together how you can best start this HRDD journey, of course, by contacting our academy @fairware.org, or maybe if you are already really advanced and you want to become a Fairware member, please join. And also for our Fairware members, it would be super nice if you can be an ambassador for our HRDD Academy and our membership. The bigger our community is, the more impact we can have together for the